Jeff, I imagine you work with people of all ages. How is Gen Z doing when it comes to financial literacy?
Well, and I can kind of speak to even the millennial generation. Price Waterhouse did a study recently and came out and they asked millennials, basic financial questions on different financial topics. Study was done. Only about 24% of the people surveyed were able to even answer basic questions.
Somebody might argue that, hey, it was never part of the education system, and yet people were somehow better with money in the past. Where does it start? Does it start in the home? Does it start with kids having part-time work? Where do you think it all starts?
Teaching the value of money at an early age. The sooner you do that and you're able to communicate it, the more successful both, your relationship is going to be with them as it relates and around money.
When you have clients who are, let's say, 30, what are some of the things you would like to see a 30-year-old client already have in place? Let's move forward 10 years. Somebody who is 40, your typical 40-year-old client. What would you like a typical 40-year-old client to have in place?
I look at it and say, you want to really manage debt. The earlier that you can start managing debt and get ahead of it, the more savings you're going to have down the road.
Your successful clients, what are they doing differently?
I would say they're savers. In most cases, they look at saving first, and that's really what they put down first. They look at saving 10 to 20% of their income before they do anything else.
This is the Money Seed Podcast, where we discuss all things investing, plain and simple, the way it should be. Please remember, this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be investment advice.
Welcome back to the Money Seed Podcast. My guest today is Jeff Panik. Jeff is a certified financial planner, and we are going to talk about financial literacy. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Jeff, tell us, what does financial literacy mean to you?
Yeah, really, it is primarily centered on communicating and having direction, which, I always say, if you look at Google, it used to be 25 years ago, you would have to go see someone for a lot of the basics as it relates to, money, investing, anything, whether it's to get information. Now with Google and the power of the internet, you could go in and put in a financial topic and get about 330 million hits on it. The problem with that, a lot of times, either the hits are trying to sell you something, or they're pointing you in the wrong direction for your specific situation. And so that's why, I get back to financial literacy and it being so important, especially ingraining it at an early age. It's never too early to really start talking about it.
Jeff, I imagine you work with people of all ages. How is Gen Z doing when it comes to financial literacy?
Well, and I can kind of speak to even the millennial generation. Price Waterhouse did a study recently and came out and they asked millennials, basic financial questions on different financial topics. And after the review and after they answered, and the study was done, only about 24% of the people surveyed were able to even answer basic questions. And, that gets into what a job the education system has done in terms of educating individuals and young adults on consumer finance. There's classes for everything in high school, but only about 22 states have a requirement that they take a financial literacy class to graduate high school. And there's even waivers with a lot of those. And, what I found, whether it was in my life or whether it's with other people coming out of school, they're very ill-equipped to deal with the decisions that they have to make when they become adults.
You mentioned that it's a bit of a failing of the education system. Somebody might argue that, hey, it was never part of the education system, and yet people were somehow better with money in the past, or at least some people tend to think that way. And maybe that survey you mentioned also points to that direction. Where does it start? Does it start in the home? Does it start with kids having part-time work? Where do you think it all starts?
Well, I think it starts at a very young age, whether it's just simply playing simple games over the holidays with the kids, getting them off their phones, playing Life, Monopoly. You can learn a lot from both of those games that you can translate into real life. I think it's about volunteering with them, but teaching the value of money at an early age. The sooner you do that and you're able to communicate it, the more successful both, your relationship is going to be with them as it relates and around money. In some cases, may not have to come in and bail them out at some point in their 20s or 30s because they've made a lot of bad decisions.
If we talk about milestones and as people get older, when you have clients who are, let's say, 30, what are some of the things you would like to see a 30-year-old client already have in place when it
Well,
comes to money?
really just an understanding of what they're saving. And, a lot of people get so caught up and in a lot of cases, things that we took for granted 25 or 30 years ago, like being able to buy a home, being able to buy a car, having a reasonable life, especially after having a college degree, you just don't take for granted anymore, given the debt that is coming in these days. And that's, you mentioned before, with this system not being set up for, the consumer finance side and the expectation not being there, the challenge with that really is the cost of college. If you could look at any weekend, and if you go on and watch either a sporting event, concert, or any type of a thing on TV, every other ad is usually going to be from a credit card company. And, the kids at an early age are just inundated with these, whether it's Capital One, all they're, it's not one specific, but, they just get in a situation where it's just, where they start buying things. There's influencers now, that wasn't the case 30 years ago. And, they look at what they have and they want, rather than working hard in some cases, they just roll up debt to get it. And in a lot of cases, they're just going in the wrong direction before they even get, we would say really out of the gates.
In some ways, giving a credit card to a young person is like giving them crack cocaine. But what are some of the good ways to teach people about credit cards and maybe ease them onto having proper credit card with a proper limit and proper usage?
Exactly. So one of the things I always suggest is getting a secured card and making sure that it is linked to your credit. It's a great way to start out building your credit. At the same time, you can't overspend with it because you can only spend the money that you put in there already into the account. So you're taking cash from the bank, putting it into the secured credit card and spending it down from there. And over time, that card can be increased, and what you're able to do is have some sort of credit history, but also at the same time, you can build a responsible habit.
Let's move forward 10 years. Somebody who is 40, your typical 40-year-old client, what would you like a typical 40-year-old client to have in place?
Well, I would like them, and a lot of it, you can't make, it's difficult to make generalizations these days because it used to be, either you finish high school or college, you get married, you have 2 or 3 children, and, you work from there. Now, a lot of people aren't getting married until their 40s, some of them not having children until that age. So really I look at it and say, you want to really manage debt. And it's one thing if you're doing things, whether it's in real estate or whether, in certain cases with college, you may have to take out debt, but you want to make sure if you do that, you're doing it, there's some return on the back end. And, there's one thing or a term that I kind of use is really like dead debt, meaning debt that you get no leverage off of, whether it's because, you've picked the wrong, you spent too much money in college on loans and you don't have a return on that because you may not be earning what the loans are required to pay down. And so I look at it and say, if the earlier that you can start managing debt and get ahead of it, the more savings you're going to have down the road because you're making less interest payments and, you're going to have more money to set aside for either retirement, for your children's education, or just simply enjoying life.
Your successful clients, what are they doing differently?
I would say they're savers. In most cases, they look at saving first, and that's really what they put down first. They look at saving 10 to 20% of their income before they do anything else. And if you have that mindset, you're going to be much further ahead. The other side of it is, it's like anything else. If we look at compounding, the more time you have, time is your favor. And you get into your 40s and 50s, if you haven't saved appropriately, compounding in time is your enemy. And so I look at it and say, if you could start, the kids off, and I use the example, if you had to encourage work, if they're in the summers and they're working, you could say, well, if you're working part-time, I'll match part of that and put it into a Roth IRA for you. You encourage the habit, if they put some of the money that they're saving in there or that they're earning in there as well, because, if they're doing that, 18, 19, 20, through, they're going to have a significant amount of money if they do, if they continue to save, when they reach retirement.
And when it comes to retirement, I mean, how does it look right now? Do you think the Americans' retirement is getting better and safer, or are we heading in the wrong direction?
I think with the reintroduction of inflation, that has been really the issue where it not only brings concern for people coming up to retirement, but especially people that were in retirement, that weren't expecting their, necessities, whether it's electricity, gas, or, just groceries to go up by 40 or 50% in a year or two. And, it's really a matter with retirement. I bring up debt again. The more that you can manage debt and not bring debt into retirement, that's one less payment or income expense that you have to pay out. And that would allow you to have more money in a more comfortable retirement. And so really, unfortunately with some people, if they start having health issues, they're just not able to work long enough to maybe fix certain things from their past, if they have debt, credit cards, but really, I look at it and say, the last thing you want to do is wake up one day and say, I'm retiring. You want it to be a 5 or 10 year window where you say, what do I need to do over the next 5 to 10 years to put myself in a position where both myself and my family can retire comfortably?
Speaking more about that retirement comfortably aspect is, I've done videos on this on my channel where if the average American looking at the average salary, say, invests 20% of their income every year, starting at age 25, by the time they're age 60, they're having a multi-million-dollar retirement fund or investment, nest egg kind of thing. And yet it's not happening, right? When you look at actual statistics, the average 401k account is like $100,000 or something. I mean, I don't quote me on that one, but why are retirement finances not as good as they should be?
Well, I think one of the things is really the shift from defined benefit to defined contribution, meaning, we're shifting from pension, that was guaranteed an income stream similar to Social Security that's guaranteed, to defined contribution where you're kind of on your own and you may get a match along the way with it. So you completely change the habits of most employees, and the private sector led with pensions up until the 401ks were introduced. And what you had was a complete reversal, where I would say a majority, especially of federal employees, have pensions. The majority of private sector employees do not. And, I always say, and I use the analogy of a stool, the more legs to the stool or the chair, the more supportive it's going to be and the less likely you are to fall out of it or fall off or the chair give out. And that's the way I look at retirement. The more streams of income you have and the more sources of income, the more stable your retirement is going to be and the less risk you're going to have in terms of running out of money or not having enough money to keep up with inflation.
Do you have any, I know no one's got a crystal ball, but do you have any projections on where inflation is going, the economy is going, and how will Americans' retirement look like, say, 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
Yeah, that's the one funny thing. I wish if I could go back, I guess I probably wouldn't be sitting here if I knew where things were when I started 25 years ago. I think the big challenge really for most people entering retirement, and I can use a comparison and say, well, if somebody says, I want to put a certain amount of money away to get a 10% down payment on a certain amount on home over the next 5 years, I could tell them specifically, or anyone could tell them, you could go online and look at a calculator and know how much you would need to put away monthly. The big challenge with retirement is you get into healthcare costs, you get into inflation, and you get into taxes. And really, my biggest concern moving forward is really the promises that we've made, as well as the debt and deficit that we've run up as a nation, and the ability to say, well, everyone's taxes are going to stay where they're at or go down, and the assumption with a lot of the 401ks putting money away on a pre-tax basis was that when you retire and you have to take the money out, you're going to be in a lower tax bracket. My belief, and maybe, in the next couple of years, that may still be the case, but my belief is you get out a few more years, the way we're spending and the deficits we continue to run up, the taxes are going to go up for everyone. I have a lot of clients that have a lot of money, and there's you can most people that have 401ks, a lot of times they'll say, well, I'll take 5,000 out of this, or I'll take 10,000 a month, or whatever the number is. Well, a lot of times what they're not looking at is, well, that's the net amount. You have to gross it up for taxes. And if we think taxes are going up, that may end up being the real enemy to, really being able to have a comfortable retirement if you're having to draw and you've accumulated and put all the money in the 401k and you don't have these other areas to draw money from.
I think that's a great segue into a different topic. Everyone just assumes that 401ks are the best way. Everyone assumes that they're safe. That's where every company, company matching plan automatically puts your portion. But if your thesis is correct and tax rates are going up in the future, and maybe your 401k is going to come under increased pressure because now you have to, like you said, take out larger amounts to pay for the larger tax chunk every single year. Does that mean that people should be looking at alternative investments and maybe not put everything in a 401k?
Well, and that gets into a change of habit, I would say, from a lot of the employers, is the ability to have a Roth 401k in the 401k as an option. And so really, especially with younger employees, I always say, it really want to look and say, you have to understand if you can have multiple, as I mentioned before, buckets or multiple places to draw money from that act differently from a tax perspective, you're going to be better off in retirement. And that's the way I look at being able to do a portion of your 1K contribution, if it's available through your employer, as a Roth contribution. It's not subject to income limitations like you would have with a Roth IRA, but it gives you the ability to have that flexibility. On the other side, I have some people that look at rental properties and look at various other investments. And that can be a very good source of stability in retirement, but you have to take responsibility. If you just say, I'm going to buy one rental property and you're not really, and you travel a lot for work and you can't really focus on it, it may end up creating more problems for you than you had before you even started.
Let's talk a little bit about your book. You are a published author. Your book is called Your Future is Now. Tell us a little bit more about the book. What can people learn about it and why should people buy it?
Yeah. So, when I was looking to put together a book, I was looking at, a lot of people when they write books, especially in the financial services industry, they focus on retirees, and, that's fine. There's a lot of information out there. But what I started looking at was the younger generation, young adults coming out, with 35, 40,000 on average in debt, plus credit card debt, without a real good source of information or even, what I wanted to try to do. And I looked at my past, I was the first one to go to college in my family. I wasn't really that well prepared. I look back and say, well, it would have been helpful to probably have a mentor, maybe do some shadowing for, with volunteer work to try to figure out maybe what I have a better idea of what I want to do. But I ended up about 3 or 4 months before graduating college, getting a letter from Sally Mae, that said I owed about $1,000 a month for the next 10 years. And, when I first got it, I was like, well, Sally Mae, I thought it was like a magazine subscription or service, but in reality, it was a loan servicer. And so, my lack of literacy going into college created a situation where I ended up, taking responsibility for it and going in the Army. The Army paid off my student loans, but it wasn't without a lot of work and, sacrifice. And so, I looked at my case and I looked at, people around me that have younger adults, and there's not a real good reference or source. So whether it's when they should go off their parents' plan, their healthcare plan, ways, one of the chapters I have is, just building a foundation, and pointing to really 5 steps that you can really build a solid financial foundation for them. And then at the same time, pivoting to college planning, not making it so that when they're seniors, they've applied to schools where it's average 60, 70,000 a year. You haven't really had to talk with them to say, well, we don't really have the money for that. And then you end up in a situation where they go out and they just borrow the money to go, and you just end, and they just end up with a whole lot of debt. And so, what I wanted the book to be is really a framework or a blueprint, really to try to help someone, a young adult, their parents, grandparents, to really help, bridge topics that, really are difficult to really get specific information for.
Could you backtrack a little bit? I think you touched on a really interesting story about high school. What were some of the things that you should have done differently in high school?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things you can do is you can volunteer, you can find a mentor. You could say, well, if I want to be an accountant or if I want to be an attorney, or if you had two or three professions, there's programs that will show you, and you'll partner you with someone to see if you even like that. I always use the example, if you don't want to talk in front of people, you probably don't want to do something that involves public speaking, so it's better to get that out on the front end. And then at the same time, I would say, I should have probably utilized community college. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I think there's not a real conversation about that. Maybe take care of the basics at community college, where in a lot of cases it can be free versus rolling up a lot of debt on the front end when you don't even know what you want to do in the first place. And that gets into why a lot of kids have to go for 5 or 5.5 years, because, they're taking very specific things initially. And, what studies have found, what would you guess the average student or average student percentage is of students that start college and change their major?
I would say probably a good, I would say 30%.
So it's 87%. And
Wow.
yeah, and so the even more striking statistic is, what would you say changing your major twice, what percentage that would be?
Okay. So this is probably going to be higher than I thought also. I'll say 40.
60. So, what it illustrates is really the sheer uncertainty when someone is going in of understanding what they're going to do, and really the importance of just having the basics in place, taking basic classes, figuring out what direction you want to go, in a lot of cases for the first time that you're really independent, because you really, we say it's like, the parents in these cases, and for better or for worse, the way the world is, really have sheltered kids a lot. And so what ends up happening is, the kids just have they have an open door of independence. And sometimes they can kind of get lost, in the wrong direction, or just, get overwhelmed and they just focus in the wrong areas, and then they have to change and shift, and there's a cost to that, if you don't take the basics initially in college.
And I mean, getting back to that topic about college, it seems like that's a waste of both time and money, right? If people are just like starting and stopping, starting, stopping. I'm almost of the fate of the plan that, if you're not sure what you want to do in college, take a year off, work, save some money, maybe travel. And then when you're a little bit older, because even like 1 year makes a big difference if somebody is 19 or 18 or 20 or 19. And there's no point going to college if you have no idea what you're getting into.
No, and unfortunately, there's a perception that everyone has to go to college. And my belief is, there's plenty of employers that if you go for a 3 to 6 month coding program or cybersecurity program, that you can get hired at a company and they'll pay for your education moving forward. And so, a lot of ways, I believe it's very important to build a skill that isn't easy, that you have to put a little effort into initially. Once you have that skill, really it comes down to kind of lifelong learning and working through that. And, I look at where I started, I was started in the financial services industry when I got out of the Army, 25 years ago. When someone would call, there was no voicemail even back then. Someone would take a message and the expectation was you get back to them in 2 or 3 days, because people were out of the office. You wouldn't get your messages right away. There wasn't even really email back then. Now it's like everything has to be instantaneous. And I think the more that you can show value by building a skill, the more that can transfer into, less debt and, less debt in a lot of cases, and really it's a cost benefit analysis, I would call it. Like a lot of things, you have to look and say, well, is the amount of debt that I'm going to have to take out to get this degree worth it? If you want to go into engineering, or if you want to go into computer science, if you want to be obviously if you want to be a doctor, you're going to have to probably take out some loans, certain areas, but you have to really say, well, are there different routes or paths? And I think that's one of the things that the education system has done a dreadful job of, is really, and the parents certainly bear a certain amount of responsibility in it. But a lot of times they're very ill prepared. Some of them having gone to college, some of them just are overwhelmed by having to work 2 jobs, and in a lot of ways, whether it's forgiving the loans or just not really setting any sort of caps on, what the colleges can charge, there's no real incentive for the colleges really to do very much because they can just keep raising the cost, and just, the students are really on the hook and the parents for that.
Absolutely. And getting back to your comment about skills, I think any kind of a skill that is in demand and a skill that is somewhat protected. What I mean by protected is that you need some kind of a certification or you have to meet some kind of a standard to do. So even something as simple, well, I don't want to say simple, but something that's relatively easy to break into, like you want to be a licensed electrician or a licensed plumber. I'm in real estate. I can tell you, they're in demand. They charge hundreds of dollars an hour. And, and you don't need a college degree, but I'm telling you, it's a good job. It's a stable job. You have a long list of clients and you have regular money coming in. And like you said, yeah, a lot of people would kind of scoff at that saying, oh, that's not a college degree. And I was saying it is a great job. And the barrier to entry and the cost to entry is a lot less than college.
Yeah. And a lot of, you have apprenticeships, you have a lot of the programs where they're begging people to go in, but, the high schools, it's just push the kids to college, whereas maybe push them to trade school, where they can actually learn a skill. They can always go to college later on. In a lot of cases, their employer, they're so desperate to get someone, they'll pay for college. It's really a matter, our society is built, the harder you work, typically the more successful you're going to be. The challenge you get into a lot of times, if you have these headwinds with the amount of college debt and sometimes credit card debt, it's really hard to get ahead. You can't really buy rental property, do different investments if you have that much debt in place to begin with, because you have to service the debt and you have to allocate more money than you probably should towards paying the interest.
Jeff, it was an absolute pleasure to speak to you today. Tell us a little bit more about the book. Where can people find the book and where can people find?
Sure. So the book's called Your Future Is Now, and it's a guide to understanding your finances and gaining independence. And it's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any place where books are sold. You can you can go on Google, look me up. It's jeffreypanik.com website. There's a lot of helpful information. The book is meant to really be a blueprint. I have QR codes in there where, if you want to say, well, if I'm putting money in a Roth 30 years from now, what does that look like for me? And, the QR code goes to a calculator. You can put it in and you have actually really kind of put the pieces together and understand why you're saving in the first place. And I think that's the critical component here. People everything is reactive. If you can actually be proactive and show either the young person or yourself why you're even putting the money in place at first, because, whether it's a 401k or initially saving, very few people understand what the end game is. They just say, I'm putting the money in there. I don't really understand it. That's just what somebody told me to do. It's better if you can put the money in and understand, well, this is how much you're going to have as a nest egg down the road.
Fantastic. I'll put those links into the show notes. Jeff, I really appreciate you talking to us today. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Thanks again, Gabe.
Hey, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Money Seed Podcast. Please remember to click like and subscribe. It really helps spread the message to other investors and it helps attract new viewers to the show. We appreciate your support. Thanks very much.